Mega Man Issue 17. It starts out with Mega Man discovering a screen in front of Dr. Light that says Blues is missing. And somehow he calls him by his model number, even though it wasn't on the screen. He explains that he was cleaning up the database and found this list of the robots he's made and whether they're completed or missing. There's no reason whatsoever that Dr. Light would have kept this information in his database if his children were capable of looking completely through it. This is the same mistake Starline made, but worse because there's no way I can logically justify it. He doesn't want him to keep discovering this to give him an excuse to hypnotize him and maybe hit him for stress relief. It's not like he's so senile that he has to have it typed down somewhere that Blues is still missing, or else he'll forget and ask where he is. He'd find out he was back right away anyways, without the word missing automatically changing if he returns home. So that's not why it's here. It's so obvious it should have kept things simple and had Dr. Light decide to tell him about Proto Man. Because he told Roll earlier that it wasn't the right time to tell her about Blues. And he's held off long enough. He tells Mega Man the truth, and he's so naive from being new to the world that all he does is excitedly ask when they get to meet him, instead of getting distrustful of him for arbitrarily hiding from him that he has an older brother. Which is not normal parents' behavior. Also, why did the writer write the sentence, "When do we get to meet him?" when it's obvious Dr. Light already met him because he made him. He apologizes to Mega Man and calls Proto Man his worst failure, which is uncharacteristically harsh and uncalled for, and eventually starts explaining the story of when he first made him many years ago. It never occurred to me that Proto Man was many years older than Mega Man. No wonder he's untrusting and unhappy if he's been wandering the world for many years alone. And Dr. Light didn't simply send flying robots after him to capture him, or at least let him talk to him, because I assume he respected his wish to leave him because he's such a good person, even though anybody would be really curious about why he left, and if he really loved him, he'd care enough to try to talk things out with him. What kind of father would let his young son with no history of bad behavior run away from home and do nothing to try to get him back, or talk to him again? Wily thinks Proto Man's hair isn't human looking. It doesn't exactly establish that this is many years ago, if both of them still have white and gray hair. Wily reminds him that Dr. Light's military contract was for an advanced fighting robot, and he's capable of advanced warfare as well as smarts. So that's the proper explanation for why Proto Man always had weapon systems. That's still bullshit. Why would he want to make the equivalent of an awesome sniper Joe to be his new son? I guess it's supposed to make sense because he just couldn't wait to have a son. Also, why are Proto Man's eyes still covered by unrealistically dark shadows at this point? Why are they so like that for an entire page? There's no point in hiding his eyes so much. He riskily greets Proto Man with a hug, who for some reason talks like a robot by not saying R before nominal, and even saying nominal as opposed to an informal word. Wily uses a measuring tape on him and feels unappreciated, and doesn't get thanked for some reason. And Proto Man should know better than to ask how he knows what a lab is already, when he's already looking at someone who makes robots. Of course he knows that because he was programmed to. Wily says he was taking the measurements he'll need for his weapon upgrades. Dr. Light says that what Proto Man needs now is culture, so he shows him the window of a clothing store which has a mannequin with a scarf on it. I like that explains why he wears a scarf. He's shown a painting at a museum. I guess people are giving them weird looks because of their outfits. We see Proto Man offers some wild animals in a forest some food on his scarf, and listen to a park symphony from the top of a hill far away because he was too cheap to buy front row seats. Then he hears some whistling as the narration by him confusingly insists that he was too enthusiastic and pushed too much of the world on his own goals on him at once, when it didn't have any consequences. I don't know why he talks about that like he regrets it. That's out of character. Proto Man uses a broom while wearing sunglasses. And for no reason, Dr. Light stammers when he tells him that he made up the whistle tune himself, as if that's scary. Later on, Dr. Light has incredibly boring, clearly unnecessary dialogue where he tells the military that Proto Man's going to shoot and hide. He throws something as well, and Dr. Light looks intimidated of him, and then electricity starts coming out of him, and he passes out because of all the strain thanks to a power generator imbalance. I'd expect an engineer as capable as him in the future to be better at making power generators. He's told he won them over, and gets told to get back to them with a smaller, simpler model. He thanks them. Proto Man wakes up on a metal bench with wires in his chest because Wily was planning to modify his power core. Dr. Light was refusing to let him do it because he wasn't the one who installed it. Wily has a good point in not trusting him to do it right when he was the one who did it wrong. Proto Man could easily walk into the room right here. Dr. Light says Wily was banned from directly working on advanced robotics, of which it was explained why, because that seems more interesting than most of the Mega Man franchise, which is just the repetitive hero fights robots. In the next panel, Proto Man goes into the room with them, and gets told that he needs his core redesigned so that its power balance won't destroy him. Even though he doesn't have to, Wily tells Dr. Light he might erase his personal coding if he doesn't do it right, somehow. It makes sense that Proto Man would assume Wily's right that Dr. Light can't be trusted to do it right, because he taunts him that he was sure his generator would work properly. It's so frustrating to see a plot point that could have easily been avoided, as Wily could have easily been allowed to fix him, and thus he'd have stayed with him. It's really obvious that there's no reason a failure to fix his battery correctly would erase his personal coding up in his head. They have nothing to do with each other being nowhere near each other. This wouldn't be a conflict. It makes sense that Dr. Light would think it'd be worth it to do whatever it takes to keep him from dying. Even if he did erase his personality traits, he would have been able to retype all of that coding instantly anyways, so it wouldn't matter because he'd never noticed the difference. There wouldn't be a difference. I have to assume that he thought he'd think it was too callous to stand if he told him that, but for all we know, that could have avoided him turning on him, thinking that he was going to make him a different person entirely, when it's obvious to anybody that would never end up being the case, as he's not evil. Proto Man asks him if he cares what he wants. Dr. Light tells Noel over a Skype call that he doesn't understand because it's to save his life, lampshading an idiot ball, forcing Proto Man to want to choose death in a kid series. And she says he should have expected him to use his free will, and she doesn't think anyone is logical when facing their own mortality. The Sonic characters would usually disagree, or else they would have all gotten killed. So where did the writer get this from? It doesn't justify the writing. Proto Man overhears Dr. Light saying to her that he wants him to use his free will, but only to make good logical decisions, which is what any parent is already like. He could have easily been talking about this to Wily, not someone who isn't in the games, making this impossible as a canon backstory. He says he called her to warn her if she's still planning on building Quake Woman, and says that it would be easier if he did rewrite that rebellious streak out of him. He could have said that to Wily too, so with that rewrite could be canon to the games. But still, I hope I'm not the only one who thinks Dr. Light saying this is out of character. She even says he doesn't mean that, and he agrees with her. And it should really go without saying that Proto Man would have heard them say this, because despite walking away, he was still only a couple of feet away from where he was last standing, and a robot would have better hearing. It's sad, but it's also disappointing that the writer forced this to happen. He could have easily not said something he'd never say, that he'd know he would never do. He could have easily not called a non-game character with the purpose of warning her not to make a robot with free will, which he wouldn't have done for Wily, as he didn't have that plan. So if he wouldn't have had this call with Wily, then this couldn't be the real backstory for the games. Proto Man took a bag of E-tanks with him when it should be clear he'd run out and then had to go back and get more. He takes the family photo and smashes it, all because Dr. Light made the easily avoidable mistake of having a call regarding him in the same building as him. It's obvious he would have wanted to seek him out, either to talk to him or see if he's talking about him, because this is something that involves him that would make him volatile. Another way this could have been avoided was if he was smart enough to have a way to put him to sleep with a button press, and he wouldn't have been able to wake up until he was fixed. If he wanted to fix him so badly, he wouldn't have wasted the time talking to someone over the laptop about it. He would have simply waited until he went to sleep and fixed him anyways, and then talked to Noel about this. Why did he wait for even a second to try to fix him? Dr. Light tells Mega Man that Proto Man's power generator would have gone offline by now. If he's right, that'd mean Wily did save his life because his power generator would have destroyed him otherwise. The text box says that only next issue will you learn the rest of his backstory, which makes me really wonder why they wasted valuable comic space on a second story that has nothing to do with him. Isn't it obvious this would be less interesting? It involves Gutsman getting brought Concrete Man to help him with finishing a dam. Gutsman doesn't think he needs help, and Dr. Light stands up to him that the rain is heavy and the town could be destroyed in a flood if he doesn't finish the dam early. He says, "So I expect you to keep your priorities straight." He has a backbone here. Construction Man's rude to him, which I have to assume is because he didn't want his help. So he accuses them of just hanging around being lazy. He drops concrete on Gutsman and hits him with something saying he's being clumsy. I just don't know why he's able to choose to do this. I know Dr. Light approves of giving free will to robots, but you'd think he'd have this as a limit. He gets threatened with a punch, and when the dam starts leaking, Gutsman blocks the leaks, and Concrete Man says he should have let his sass slide. You'd think if they were programmed to want to finish their jobs as effectively as possible, they wouldn't have been able to waste time feuding with each other. It leaks, and Concrete's punched over to the dam and sent into it. Concrete Man tells Gutsman he did nice work and gets thanked and called pal. The story ends with them singing to have fun. Mega Man Issue 18. It starts with Proto Man's narration explaining that Dr. Light couldn't guarantee that he'd remain intact if he fixed his power core, even though there was no indication he'd outright fall apart, so he doesn't want to end up living as someone else, even though it'd be obvious to him that he'd be the same way. Robots would have great hearing. He would have heard him say he wouldn't change him. Proto Man's narration says his life is lonely, as he greets a parking meter robot for being a robot, only to be disappointed that he only asks him if this is his car. And somehow, when he says no, he still asks him if he needs to pay his fees. Then he greets a flying window washing robot. How many different jobs are stolen from desperate people by robots for no reason? This doesn't make any sense because the jobs aren't dangerous. And I doubt people would pay people just to supervise robots that are guaranteed to do their jobs. The guy sweeping assumes that he's going trick-or-treating early, and I have to assume it's because of his cape. I guess he was with Dr. Light for too short a time to be made famous. Why is he bothering to pet his head without asking permission if he's just going to insult him? Then the story sidetracks to Dr. Light finding out his robot with free will left him. Wily asks him why he doesn't build housekeeping robots because the place is a pit. I kinda like the idea that maybe he's just as responsible for Mega Man's role as Dr. Light is, because he gave him the idea. He's told he's not coming back. There's no reason Wily would not know who he's referring to. Dr. Light admits it's his fault, Wily reassures him, and Dr. Light says that the problem was mixing up purposes and kids shouldn't be weapons or workers. That they need a time of innocence and room to learn at their own pace. And what makes him think that was why he left? Sure, it sped up him finding out that his power core was unstable, but that's all it did. It was going to reveal itself to be the case eventually and get him to run away anyways. And he says kids shouldn't be workers, so why is he fine with making Roll and Mega Man to work for him? After Dr. Light plans not to make the Robot Masters as human as Proto Man, which I call absolute bullshit on, as they're all have personalities, so better be explained that he changed his mind, or that's stupid writing. Proto Man sees some stereotypical bikers laughing at scared people who ask them to let them go. This just perpetuates the mostly false stereotype that bikers are evil, which is just hacky writing. A biker would hate this. Proto Man grabs one of their weapons, swinging him off his bike, and a chain being put around his neck is also a waste of time. Someone wants to run him over, and he shoots a bike and lifts him. Just because he has green hair, Proto Man calls him Green Biker Dude, which takes me out of the story as a forced reference to Mega Man X because he barely has any green on him, and the bike's also barely green, and it's not Mega Man X. So he scares them away, and while the people he saved don't mistreat him as he asks if they're okay, he notices electricity come out of him and starts walking away. We see him pull someone up a cliff, with the story being too lazy to explain why, as in why they were there. Then he runs away from a fire carrying a baby, and frees someone from a crashed long vehicle and pulls a bus that almost ran up a bridge. I guess those drivers were drunk at the wheel. How did Mega Man not already know about him if he was saving people so much? Wouldn't he have been reported on? Wouldn't he have been caught on camera eventually, even if he ran away as soon as he was done? While it seems like a pleasant surprise I like seeing, there was a reason I didn't think he was doing anything but wandering. Aside from the obvious that it was very unlikely that he'd ever have to save someone even once. He expects me to believe that while his power is recharged after a nap, he receives less energy each time. Well, that's convoluted. When he began to think that he was hours from dying, he wisened up and planned to return to Dr. Light for help. But when he saw he had made a different son, he grabbed the idiot ball again and decided it's totally better to die because he's got perfectly nice younger siblings now. And go figure, he built them. What'd he expect? How selfish was he to expect him not to do this, to just live without him? But he was already selfish enough to run away. This is like if a kid ran away from his parents, came back and found out they had new kids, and decided not to come home because of that. I mean, wouldn't that be stupid? He should have been written to have a thought bubble after this, explaining that the reason he assumes he doesn't care about him anymore is that he could have tried to track him down, and never even bothered because he didn't want to face him again. Another unlikely thing happens. Proto Man walks by the window of a store with TVs on in front of him set to the cable news, which tells him about Landfront ruins. And because it's a machine graveyard essentially, he figures it's a good place to go for his last home. It sure is convenient for Dr. Light that even though he goes on to want revenge on him later, he didn't return home to get revenge on him right after he saw Mega Man with him. If the logic is he's vengeful, then he would have gotten back at him right away. The games are better for not showing that. If the logic is he's too good a person to want to get back at him, then he wouldn't have tried to work for Wily in the first place. It just had to be lame again and have it so that something could have easily not happened just before the story ended. I assumed he just wandered here because he was exploring the world, so it was inevitable. But he could have easily not seen those TVs. But what's really lame about him coming here is that he wouldn't have come here in the canon of the games because it's associated with Raw Moon, who's actually from a non-canon game that Capcom disowned. He whistles to express his individuality before passing out, and then wakes up near Wily, ending the story. In the next story, someone tells Iceman he appreciates all of his help, but he could get a contractor to expand the research center. He says he knows just the guy, and Gutsman shows up and gets thanked. Why did he want to hire a contractor instead? Are these two still uncomfortable with robots after all of Iceman's help? I've been under the assumption that they don't have to pay these robots, and they don't have to pay Dr. Light either. Gutsman needs to be told what to do because he didn't read his email because he spent too much time partying last night. Iceman's been helping the research team study the glacier. He tells them the glacier has gone faster, and for no reason, Gutsman assumes he was called here because he's needed to stop the glacier from destroying this place. Even though Iceman was in a good mood talking about it. Sadly, Gutsman is written to walk through some of the wall to escape, damaging the building. And somehow he says, no time to waste, instead of listening to Iceman say no. So the forced comedy forces him to keep going, and he starts punching the glacier. I don't take Iceman seriously when he says he's destroying a fragile ecosystem because there wasn't shown any wild animals actually living on the glacier being scared away by him. After Iceman talks to them, he just says he can push it back. And it cuts ahead in time to Iceman calling Dr. Light with a cell phone telling him Gutsman won't work out. Mega Man calls Dr. Light with his head, but not every other Robot Master. That's some blatant favoritism, and it shouldn't be kept up if it's forcing Dr. Light to buy cell phones for every Robot Master and pay the phone bills every month. The story ends with it being revealed that Gutsman got trapped in ice. I'm glad it was stood up to by that little guy, but it's pretty obvious it would have been more satisfying if we saw him freeze him right after he wanted to freeze him. The first story was needlessly sad and frustrating. Because to my disappointment, it was full of idiot balls and convoluted contrivance to force Proto Man to leave Dr. Light, when there's many ways that could have been avoided, especially if this genius was written like a genius. There's no way he would have made his power core so shoddy that it needed more modifications if he's smart. There's no way that fixing his power generator would run the risk of erasing his personal coding. I shouldn't have to explain that something in his chest being modified would have no chance of affecting something in his head, and there's no reason that his CPU would be in his chest. Pretty sure that's not the case for any other Robot Master, so why? If Wily's supposed to be evil, he would have never even told Dr. Light in front of him that there was a chance of him erasing his personal coding, because he wanted a reason to care. Oh no, his dad would have done anything to save him, go figure. When obviously he could replace his personal coding with identical coding instantly, and he could have told him that. The idiot ball comes in because he would rather die than risk coding being erased that would instantly be replaced anyways. This is like if someone would rather die than let a word in Microsoft Word be erased and replaced with an identical word. I always thought he would have left him because he scared him losing his temper with someone due to free will, which would cause him to talk about getting rid of it more naturally, when he wouldn't know he was being listened to by him. He did hear him say that would be easier, and he could have easily not said that when he wasn't going to do that. But he'd only leave anyways if he thought he would change his mind when he said that he would never do that. I can't even imagine why he did program him with the ability to betray him, when he wants a son that'd make good logical choices. He never would have made a killer robot to be like a son for him. The story managed to screw up so bad that he logically never would have existed. The silent montage was the only good part of the story. Even the thing prompting Dr. Light to tell Mega Man about this was forced, because if he didn't want him to see the words "blues missing," and he was able to find it, he would have deleted them. He never would have told him all of this so soon. He could have also told Proto Man he'd delay fixing him until the core starts trying to destroy him, even if that wouldn't have convinced him. The second story seems like totally uninteresting filler because obviously we'd rather see the Proto Man backstory conclude in it, so it doesn't encourage you to read it right away. And it's only about a dam leaking and getting fixed in the most predictable way by Concrete Man. It's only not pointless for explaining how he met Gutsman, but I didn't need to see that. The first story is about Proto Man's life after he ran away from home, where it suddenly revealed he was saving people constantly. It's a nice surprise, but very unlikely, especially since it happens more than once. It also makes it hard to believe that Dr. Light had heard of him doing that and instead just wondered how his life was like and thought he died. Plus, the writer was too lazy to explain why he didn't get tracked down by Dr. Light. It was implausible and it took too long for such a basic plot, but it was nice. It's better than a story where he loses his temper with people. The second story was a pointless idiot's plot, where in order to try to expand an Arctic research center we don't care about, Iceman calls Gutsman there, but somehow he thinks he needs him to destroy a glacier because he wasted time telling him that it's getting faster for no reason. And somehow, after Iceman tells him no, he acts like he didn't hear him, a narrative cheat, eventually forcing him to freeze him. I hate that Gutsman damaged the walls of the building walking out of it somehow, and did something he should know would upset Iceman. It only exists to make Iceman and the others miserable for no reason. If his idea of comedic little plots is pointless idiot plots where the only jokes are idiot balls, I'd rather not have them. Especially since it doesn't have Mega Man at all, so it just feels pointless.